this summer was more or less an unprecedented heat wave, and fish definitely, including salmonids, suffered. It was an exceptional year for us to get a lot done in the field. We have an Instream construction window, which is roughly July 1st to September 30th, depending on the species of salmon that are present in your project. And so you try and cram a lot of work into that time. With every Instream construction project, there is water considerations, fish considerations, and again, sadly this year, a lot of streams were dry, which was not good for salmon, but allowed us to actually get a lot of work done.
We're at a project on McClellan Creek. McClellan is definitely a very coho-y stream. I've seen coho in the stream many times.
And there's a pond that had been installed many years ago, and it has a very elaborate kind of dam, and it has about a 2-foot drop. And then once it goes over this weir, it goes through 3 or 4 more drops and then into a culvert that has a fairly steep slope.
Coho are generally in the stream here for 1 year. It's 1 to 2 years. A lot of coho streams do go dry, and the ponds are where they live for the 1 year.
Our idea in this design was to close off that little fish ladder, fish weir pond control system, eliminate that, put in a new crossing over top of the stream, and then cut a new notch in this concrete dam. And then to allow for that drop, we spread this new channel construction out about 125 feet to keep the gradient at about 3%. One of the crew members was up there and documented a fish entering the pond, and we have a very avid volunteer who's up there checking that site every day, and he counted 800 fish had gone over this structure in 4 days. It'll be interesting to see what happens in the next year and how many juveniles we find in the channel around this project. This is a project on upper end of Haynie Creek, which is a tributary of Drayton Harbor and a very productive system for coho. And Department of Fish and Wildlife had done a project here in the mid-1990s. And the thought was where you have a significant amount of drop between a pond or a culvert or a lake, you could build a consecutive series of rock weirs. And I guess because, building rock walls or dams or jams, shot rock was chosen because you can work with it easier. It has squarer edges or sharper edges, and you can build a system of walls. And people thought this would work great for fish passage. We'll just build these series of steps out of this quarry rock. However, hydrology has its own plan, and it will winnow out any fine sediment or anything in between these blocks, and eventually the blocks become fish passage barriers. In more recent years, we've been going with more of a roughened channel approach, which is where we're using a substrate mixture of cobble and gravel and finer sediments that will still allow for the water to move through the system, but you don't have these abrupt drops, so you can allow a lot more sinuosities of creek moving around through these pool systems, and then you can see larger substrate and smaller drops. Technology changes. What we did 20 years ago, people have learned what was not maybe the best choice or was successful, but for a limited amount of time. And we're always learning, we're always applying new things. In this specific project, it's on a tributary of the Middle Fork, Nooksack. This is a tributary that supports numerous salmonid species, but probably the most present or most focused upon is the pink run. So they have a pink salmon run on odd years. So this was an odd year, and you have a huge influx of pink salmon into this system. But it also supports coho, it also supports steelhead. At the lower end of the tributary, it also supports early chinook, which are also listed like steelhead. There's these big ponds that were probably 100 years ago mined for peat. So peat was stripped out of these ponds, and there's a numerous series series of ponds and tributaries that all lead into this system. And for rearing habitat, for coho and other species that winter over and spend time in the system, it's ideal. So what made this project a little unique is that we did an assessment of these two barriers in 2003, and then we tried to get funding. And it's a bit of an anomaly because this private property borders on DNR property.
Most of the grant funding that you guys find is for private property, and this happens to be an easement on DNR land. DNR doesn't give easements to private individuals, but this was done before DNR owned it.
And so DNR wouldn't fix the culverts because it was a private driveway, and the private landowner couldn't get funding because the actual road was on DNR land. And eventually we found some funding last year. So there were two culverts, and so this culvert was replaced with a 50-foot bridge, and almost immediately there are fish, pinks, moving up through the system. So it was a very quick project, and pinks were immediately underneath the bridge and spawning in this reach. And then culvert 2, there's also been spawning fish moving up into this system too.